Give me the word when you're ready.
All right, sir. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah, just playing because since we're doing new graphics for the first time on the fly,
Okay.
and you're our guinea pig, this is working well.
All right.
My pet peeve is on TV when they don't mic it up correctly and they have the black cord hanging in front of everybody.
Okay.
That's my pet peeve, but that's not a good one to use.
All right,
Okay.
don't carry away in there, Vanna. We know you got a
Well,
lot.
now she's going to be coming in and out of the show like this. Because I got another one.
I do. I have a lot. Don't read my Sunday paper.
Hey, you want me to open up with the graphics? Want me to open up with that?
In other words, we can open it up like I'll see it.
Nah, that's okay. Let's just do the way we normally do it.
Okay.
All
And,
right, you may begin at any time.
okay. Hello and welcome to the Leadership Edge. I am your host, Ted Gorski. The Leadership Edge is a show that focuses on leadership topics that are affecting you on a daily basis. Our goal in the show is to really share some tools and techniques to help you become better leaders on a daily basis. I am the host, Ted Gorski, and what we're going to do is explore some things today. And today's topic actually stems from an email that I received from producer Bill yesterday. And it became what I call a pet peeve of mine. And I was sitting at my desk yesterday and I said, what show can I do for tomorrow for my audience? And producer Bill sent this email, a blistering email, looking for a disk drive that I borrowed. And that was a pet peeve of mine, was how he asked where the disk drive was. And I said, voila, I have my show for today. And today's show is Leadership Pet Peeves. It's those things that bother me in regards to leadership. And I'm going to share with you my top 10 pet peeves that most leaders that I have worked with and coached I've encountered. And we're going to share why those are pet peeves and what you can do to resolve those if, in fact, they're some of your pet peeves. So, Producer Bill, do you have any pet peeves?
Oh, you betcha.
Do share.
I need my beer served quickly when I get in the restaurant. I give you 1 minute. That's it.
That's it. And what happens after 60 seconds?
I get very angry.
See, I never thought Producer Bill would get angry without getting his beer. But now I know that's one of his pet peeves. You also have some pet peeves, and we're going to talk about what a pet peeve is. So let's get to the definition of a pet peeve. A pet peeve is a continual annoyance. This is one of those things that as a leader that nip at you on a daily basis. As producer Bill says, if he doesn't get his beer, and I would attest to that, I got his beer today at 61 seconds, and he gave me a nasty look. Shame on you, producer Bill. Now I know why this show sometimes goes around kind of crazily, because you're drinking behind the booth. Now stop that.
Gotta stay happy, Ted.
You best. That's why you're my number 2 producer. So let us share with you my top 10 pet peeves in regards to leadership and what you can do to avoid these pet peeves. Now, producer Bill, focus. Don't get too distracted by this slide. Not modeling behavior is my first pet peeve. Now, we are not talking runway models, because that's what producer Bill's probably thinking about. Are you, sir?
All the time.
All the time. See what I'm dealing with here? What we're talking about modeling behavior is those instances where you say one thing and do another. It's the old walk the talk and talk the walk, which we've talked about in many different shows. And I've encountered many leaders who, as I am coaching them, really talk about some things that they're expecting from their direct reports of their employees. But what's quite interesting is they expect it, but they don't model it. Now, when there is a misalignment on those particular things, that's where it adversely affects a leadership's ability. So one of the key things is really understanding the importance of modeling behavior. And some things that come to mind is some of the presidential candidates, where they are saying one thing, but their actions show another. For example, when a presidential candidate is taking funds from a country that's not about women's rights, but they're campaigning on women's rights, that is not modeling behavior. That is really showing the antithesis what we're talking about. So modeling is one of my pet peeves. And I know when I coach leaders, that's one of the first things I address is making sure that alignment is there. And we work on to make sure that they stay in alignment, and we create actions to make sure that stays in place. So as a leader, what are you modeling? And are you in sync with your behaviors? Because let me tell you, the actions and behaviors have to be aligned for it to be successful. And if you're not, it's adversely affecting your leadership abilities. But it's one of my pet peeves that I really, really focus on. So let's turn to number 2, pet peeve. Everyone is like me, pet peeve. Now, this is an interesting pet peeve because when I coach leaders, a lot of them say to me, hey, Ted, I would have a great business if it wasn't for the people. Can you imagine that? I sat there stunned. What was he talking about? Well, what he was referring to is he wanted people like him. He wanted people thinking like him, acting like him, and displaying behaviors like him. The reality is, as leaders, we are dealing with different types of personalities, different types of behavioral styles. It's your job as a leader to figure out who is on your team and to adjust your style accordingly. But what happens is that leaders find it easy to deal with people who are like them. They find it easy that those type of people see things the same way. They understand what's important to them, show the same sense of urgency that is important. And it's amazing, a lot of these leaders talk about a sense of urgency. And the one thing I say to them is that sense of urgency for you can be seen extrovertedly. In other words, I can see it in your behaviors. Well, there are other styles out there that have a sense of urgency but don't display it externally, but more internally. And a lot of the work I do with coaching these type of leaders is to get them to realize that people are different and you need different styles on your team to be successful. So the key thing for you as a leader is to understand that people are different. You don't want people to be thinking like you in the organization, because if they're all thinking like you, most likely what's happening is we're not looking at a problem from different perspectives. And that's vital for solving problems. So the key thing you need to look at is, do I have people around me who are like me, or do I have people who have different styles on my team? Because it's really vital for you to have that so you can make better decisions. Third pet peeve. And producer Bill, I don't know if you're on this one, but you're pretty close. The old inflated ego.
Looks like me.
Kind of does. That kind of does. That's why I picked this picture. I will tell you that a lot of my work with some of the leaders that I deal with, a lot of it has to do and revolve around the whole concept of an inflated ego. They see results as what they do. They see that things are a result of everything that they have done. Now, what's interesting is if they're walking around thinking that, what do you think the behaviors are when they're walking around the organization? What do you think other people are seeing when they have someone who has a very big inflated ego? I'm sure you've encountered these kind of people. What happens when you're around them? Do you feel motivated? Do you feel engaged to do a better job? I was just talking to a company which we're talking about some issues they would have in employee engagement. And one of the things we talked about was some of their leaders that were in the organization and what they were doing. And a lot of the issues that kind of came up were from leaders who had an inflated ego, which as a result can get filtered down the organization and can have negative impacts. So the question you have to ask yourself as a leader is, do you have your ego in check? I recently did a workshop for some emerging leaders in a company. And one of the things I talked to them about was checking their ego at the door. Because they are now managers in the organization, doesn't mean that they have to inflate their ego. The most results they can get is to really understand and keep their ego in check. So one of the things we talked about was how to do that, to make sure that they keep their ego at a balanced level. So it's important for you to look at your ego and say, how are you in terms of your ego? Is yours inflated, and do you have one that's underinflated? The key thing you need to ask yourself is go to a trusted person in your organization that you can trust and ask them. Tell me, do I come across as someone who has an overinflated ego? This could impact your results big time without you knowing it. And it's one of my pet peeves. Fourth, negativity. This one is probably one of my biggest pet peeves. One of the things that I've noticed with some leaders is as I'm starting to work with them, one of the things they do is they'll come across to me and they'll say to me, Ted, I'm a realist, that I look at things from a realistic perspective. And I say, okay, great. But as we start diving down into issues, what I begin to notice is the person is a very negative person. They're seeing things on what can't be done versus what can be done. Imagine working for a leader in which you're bringing up ideas or solutions, but every time get knocked down. Every time get nitpicked on for the result or for that particular solution. After a while, it can get very unmotivating to kind of work with that type of leader. Negativity has a very adverse effect on individuals, especially if you have someone who's extremely negative, who has very high standards. Because those type of leaders, it doesn't matter what you do, you can never be good enough. And that's one of the things I work at when I do some assessments on leaders is I look for that dynamic. And I will tell you that I did a workshop in which there were 80 managers in the room, and about 6 of them had that dynamic. And my question to them was, are you having a revolving door in your department? And it's amazing, the managers, when I asked that question, said absolutely yes. That's a huge dynamic of negativity because the people on their team could never attain levels that the manager wanted. So one of the things I do when I'm coaching leaders who have a negative slant is I do what's called a 2-for-1 challenge, meaning before they can give me the negative issue that they want to bring up in terms of the conversation, they have to provide 2 positives prior to that. And I will tell you, I am stretching them to really open up their positive mindset. So if this is something that's affecting you, I ask you to take this challenge and to really try to find 2 positives before you bring up that negative. And if there's a second negative issue that bring up, you have to still find 2 more positives. It's a way to exercise that particular muscle. But this is one of my pet peeves that really will affect not only a manager's and a leader's performance, but the team's morale. And that's just unacceptable to be an effective leader. My 5th pet peeve, inflexibility. Does that you, Producer Bill?
Not me. I'm very flexible, but the number 2 person that is now number 1, very inflexible.
See, Producer Bill's trying to move up to number 1 producer here. He's still kind of slipping, especially after that email, which hit one of my pet peeves. But inflexibility. As a leader, it's our job to find the best solutions, not the my way is the best way mentality. Well, what ends up happening with the my way, best way mentality is as a result, you don't look at other alternative solutions. The goal here is to be as flexible, especially in this type of environment in these days where change is inevitable. You have to have the ability to adjust and change your game plan. This is what Coach Belichick does all the time in his game plans when the Patriots play. He's constantly changing in the game depending on what the other team is doing. He's not stuck on his game plan. Yes, he comes in with one, but he also realizes he has to be flexible during the game. You have to be the same way as leaders, looking at your ability to change as things pop up. Do you have that ability to listen and hear and be flexible in changing your plans? Are you flex enough to say, you know what, I may have been wrong in my initial assessment. we need to make some adjustments here. But flexibility and inflexibility is another one of my pet peeves. Number 6, managing emotions or not managing emotions. What's kind of interesting is I have encountered a lot of leaders who really have difficulty managing their emotions. What happens is in situations, they may go to anger just like that. And all of a sudden, their anger lashes out. Maybe lashes out in a meeting. Maybe lashes out on an individual contributor. Maybe someone on their team. But it's their ability not to keep themselves in balance. And one of the things I talked about to my coaching clients is the whole thing of staying in balance. When our emotions take over and we spike up, what ends up happening is if you're in a very emotional level up here, you cannot make the most effective decisions because they're based on emotions. And up here, if you make decisions, you're going to leave a lot of collateral damage. The whole thing about managing emotions is realizing that when you spike up, it's that ability to bring yourself back to balance so you can make decisions on a balanced level. Now, the one thing I really teach my coaching clients and my leaders is that anger is not a bad emotion. It's labeled as bad, but anger tells us one or two things. Number one, is there a injustice being done that you need to make just? Or two, is there a boundary that's been crossed? The key thing is to really manage your anger and ask those questions to really figure out the right action to really deal with that whole concept of anger. But our emotions are always telling us stuff. As leaders, it's our ability to dissect what they are, but to manage them or have actions that are on a balanced level. So what I challenge you to do is look at those things that get you angry. What are those things that really get you really crossed up? And be able to really understand the triggers behind those emotions. The more aware you are of triggers, the less impact they'll have on you. And I will say, with my work with leaders, many of them don't realize what their triggers are. Many of them are very unconscious, and as a result, they will spike up real quick and not realize why. I teach them how to really analyze those situations to be more effective, to really find those hidden triggers. Because those hidden triggers is what's causing them from being great. So the key thing here is not managing emotions. One of my pet peeves, especially when I'm coaching my leaders, when they talk about emotional things, when they're not able to understand why they got that particular emotion and the collateral damage they left. I wanted them to understand and become more aware. So I challenge you to really look at those particular emotions and really try to analyze what those emotions are trying to tell you. Number 6, lack of communication. You like my little cartoon there, Producer Bill?
I do, Ted, but that's number 7. I don't mean to correct you, sir. You said 6.
Oh, my goodness. See? All right. Thanks for correcting me on the show, Producer Bill.
Oh, it's just a little pet peeve.
Yes, obviously. Number 7. How's that, Producer Bill?
Right on.
Lack of communication. I will tell you that this is probably one of my biggest pet peeves in regards to my coaching clients. One of the things they don't realize is how they are coming across to others and how they're communicating to others. A lot of times they think they're communicating, but they're not. But you're saying, Ted, that doesn't make any sense. Well, a lot of times they may be asking a particular person on the team to do something, but they're not giving them the full story. They're not giving them the full expectations. It's more what I call a hit and run, where they kind of drop something and take off. Right? Part of effective communication is to be able to have a dialogue so there's clear understanding of what's needed and what the expectations are. Sometimes leaders, what happens in the heat of the moment, do a bunch of drive-bys. And as a result, when they get the results or they get what they're asked for, it's usually not the result that they're looking for. It's because their instructions were inadequate. So it's important for leaders to understand that your communication has to be clear and your communications have to be focused and effective, which means that when you are in those conversations, that you are actively listening to the other person. So for you as a leader, do you do hit and runs when you're in the office? Do you walk by someone's desk and kind of drop something down without giving them the full instructions on how in what they need to do. It's important for you to kind of look at that and analyze that. Pet peeve number 8. How's that, Producer Bill?
You learn well.
Yes, yes. Lack of integrity. This is tying into our first pet peeve, my first pet peeve, which was the whole concept of modeling behavior. Integrity is the core of leadership. What is important is you have to be able to have the ability to really have a strong character. People are looking at you and they're seeing that you're living values, that you are projecting values, but more importantly, you have to live them. You have to show. So if you say you're honest, you must show by your actions that you are honest. To be able to say you're honest but have actions that are not does not build integrity. And I will say that once you lose integrity as a leader, you're going to lose a lot of your effectiveness. There are several presidential candidates who are lacking in integrity. They talk about having integrity, but their actions don't show it. They talk about being open and honest, but they don't display that. They talk about that they are providing everything they need and being transparent, but they're not. That impacts their ability to be an effective leader. Don't allow this to happen to you. Your integrity is a very delicate egg that must be held delicately, but you also must manage it effectively. That your actions and behaviors must be in line with that. As a coach, I have to model behavior and I have to show integrity. A lot of the leaders that I work with will tell me one of the reasons that they work with me is they realize that in organizations, when I am coaching leaders, that usually that particular conversation stays within us. As a coach, I have a very strong confidentiality agreement. I have to follow that as being a coach. I cannot go to a company and tell people exactly what we said in a coaching session. But a lot of the leaders I work with realize that I honor that, and I hold that very, very important. I make sure that that stays where it is, that conversation stays within us, because I need the coachee, or this space, the leader, to realize that if they're going to shed some of their internal fears and concerns, that they're going to stay within us. The old whatever happens Vegas stays in Vegas mentality. So that's a very important piece. So you must analyze your integrity and make sure that it stays above ground at all times. Number 9, playing favorites. This is another one that I see quite a bit, in which leaders really focus on a certain amount of people. That what they do is they'll look at a certain amount of people and they always go to them whenever there are tasks that need to be done. So what happens is, because they're growing these favorites, they're not developing other people. And the key for leaders is they have to develop others. They have to develop them to become better employees in the organization. I will tell you that I have encountered many leaders who get so focused on really just focusing on a certain group and not others. So for them, I really talk about what they need to do to stay focused, that they have to develop these others. But what they do is they write them off right away by saying they can't do certain things, so I'm going to focus on the people who can deliver for me. Bad move. It's their role as leaders to develop the people who are substandard. You cannot be shown as playing favorites. You have to maintain neutrality at all times. And many times as leaders, as I'm coaching them, I'm really showing them what they have to do to develop those other people to bring them up to snuff. So don't play favorites, because what happens is it will come across negatively on your leadership. And lastly, a final pet peeve of mine is staying in your cave. Leaders have to go out and see their people. Leaders have to walk the floor. Leaders have to go out and get a pulse of what's happening in the organization. The important part here is that they have to make that effort. You have to go out and get a sense of what people see, what they're encountering. I will say on many occasions where I have coached emerging leaders or middle managers, one of the things they say to me is, I don't see my leader. Matter of fact, I'll be lucky if I see them once a week. Can you imagine that? These are their managers who they're hardly seeing in a week. That's just unacceptable. As a leader, it's your job to go and get a pulse. It's your job to kind of go out there and see what's happening, not being surprised. And if you get perceived and labeled as someone that's staying in their cave, it's not going to really, it's going to negatively affect your leadership skills. So, these were my top 10 pet peeves. These were the top 10 things I see a lot in my coaching, and this is a lot of the top 10 things that I usually will talk about and help leaders develop or get these bad habits out of them for them to be successful. I challenge you with these 10 pet peeves, look at yourself and rate yourself in these particular areas and correct it as soon as possible, because this is a continual annoyance, not only on you, but it's continual annoyance on the people that you lead and manage. So your job is to correct these as quickly as possible because it's affecting your leadership. So hopefully we've given you some insights on some of these my pet peeves and what you can do. If there's anything we can do to help you with your leadership ideas, issues, feel free to reach out to us at www.getYourEdge.com. We're more than happy to help you in any of your leadership challenges. So thanks for tuning in this week to the Leadership Edge. We'll see you next time.